Imagine the Schuykill in the 1700s as a place with waters so pristine that people came far and wide to be baptized, a place where the fish were abundant, a place where our founding fathers took walks to clear their heads after a long day's work. In the early days of William Penn's green country town, the Schuykill River was on the far side of town as development concentrated on the Delaware River centered on Market Street. All of this was about to change with the coming of the Industrial Revolution, when the river was used, abused, and then all but forgotten. This is a story of those who sought to reclaim the river from its industrial past. The transformation of the banks of the Schuykill from forest to farmland was complete by the late 1700s. The beginnings of industrialization began in the early 1800s and gradually picked up speed over the course of the century. The environmental effects of industrialization were even then a cause of concern. After the Fairmount Waterworks had been in successful operation for 40 years, the city began in the 1850s to buy the banks upstream. This land was the start of Fairmount Park, bought for the purpose of preserving water quality. By contrast, the tidal river was being ruined. By 1855, it was still largely farmland. 20 years later, it was entirely overtaken by smoke-belching industry. Throughout the first half of the 20th century, the growth of industry continued unabated. Though the cheek-by-jowl factories and coal yards were sometimes depicted as picturesque, the cruel reality was that of stink and soot. However, in the middle of the industrial era, inspired by the City Beautiful movement that had flourished in the late 1890s and early 1900s, a lone voice began the process of reclaiming the river. In 1924, John Frederick Lewis published his book Redemption of the Lower Schuykill, restating the case for a green country town. He wrote, "I feel a call to duty not unlike that of the disciples to preach the gospel, because I know of no more important work that our beloved city could presently undertake than that of regenerating the Lower Schuykill." How do you reintroduce people to a river that no living person has enjoyed? Here is John Frederick Lewis's Schuykill, and here is the river over 80 years later, in 2008, when this video was first produced. The story of how this happened is a true David versus Goliath story of how community activists played a vital and essential role in the Schuykill River revival. Key to this revival was the planning efforts that came before it. Almost 40 years after John Frederick Lewis's book, Ed Bacon, then executive director of the City Planning Commission, included plans for Schuykill River Park in his 1960 comprehensive plan. 4 years later, the first of many river park plans was created by an urban planning firm called the Delta Group. In 1978 and again in 1987, small sections of the river park around Spruce Street were constructed. The hope then was that this would create the momentum to complete the park to the Fairmount Dam, but work was not to start again for a decade. During that hiatus, while on a canoe ride by the peaceful river banks, I became inspired to do something. The whole idea of a river park from the Art Museum to Spruce Street was the primary reason we moved to the Fittler Square neighborhood in 1971. We got very excited when bits and pieces were built, but each time construction just stopped. It seemed such a great idea to me, so I became curious about what the holdup was. After I had been talking this up and having meetings with neighbors, a friend of mine suggested my story to Terry Samuels, a journalist for the Inquirer. From that interview, the article, Dream Revived for River Park, was published in January 1991. From that moment forward, everything changed. The next Monday, I found a message on my answering machine from the Pew Charitable Trust. Their executive director, Rebecca Reimel, invited me to come in to talk about my work. As a neophyte to the nonprofit world, little did I know what a unique opportunity this was. A short time later, the newly formed Schuykill River Development Council received its first grant, which in turn was followed by another from the William Penn Foundation. This was the beginning of a journey that lasted 10 years. At the time, my friends thought I was completely crazy to undertake a project that had shown such little progress over 30 years. However, new doors seemed to open every day, and progress seemed inevitable. Visionary leadership, as well as endless persistence, was key to our success. There were three elements necessary to that success: a compelling yet doable plan, new sources of funding to create a short-term signature project, and a public-private partnership that will sustain the vision for the decades that it takes to create a waterfront. One of the newly formed nonprofit's first jobs was to update the 1967 River Park Master Plan, then 25 years old. Key to the new plan's popularity were its renderings. Unlike typical landscape architectural renderings that include only plants, the new drawings depicted people having a good time, something that would draw people in. A booklet including these images was published describing a new vision. The river and its park would join together Center City, the economic engine of the 20th century, with West Philadelphia and its universities, research institutions, and hospitals, the economic engine of the 21st century. This notion of connecting the banks across the river was later elaborated in the Gateways Plan, which imagined redeveloping the Center City bridges to be more pedestrian-friendly. A focus of the plan was developing the block between Market and Chestnut on both sides of the river, which included a cover over the CSX tracks. Realizing the importance of getting people out on the water, we developed several plans to make that happen. The dock and ferry plan called for the development of docks at the waterworks, Bartram Garden, and Fort Mifflin, as well as a ferry service to connect these sites. After the first phase of River Park construction had begun, we decided to take advantage of the momentum we had created to plan for projects that would revitalize the entire tidal river. We secured a $500,000 matching grant from the Commonwealth to fund a master plan from the dam to the Delaware. Through a series of community meetings, we created a plan with design principles that guide development along the river to this day, foremost of which is the notion of a continuous greenway along the river's length. That this plan is both compelling and doable is attested to by the number of priority projects that either have been realized or are actively being planned for implementation. New funding sources played a key role in breaking the logjam that had for so long prevented the river park from being built. Critical to SRDC's success was the new highway bill signed into law in 1991 called the Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act, or more simply, ICE-T. This breakthrough piece of legislation mandated a 10% set-aside for transportation enhancements, one of which was bike and pedestrian paths. So, in our grant application for $2 million, we renamed the river park the Schuykill River Pedestrian and Bike Trail. The application itself included drawings, photographs, and pages of letters and postcards of support from everyone from senators to school children. Then we waited and waited, and one day, while I was attending a meeting in Harrisburg, a friend leaned over and whispered that we got our grant. I don't remember being ever more thrilled in my life. I was sure the wheels of my car never touched the road on the way back to Philadelphia. SRDC began by sponsoring community cleanups and tree plantings. Volunteers met one Saturday a month, and soon the entire northern section of the park was cleared. The council partnered with Philipride and Whisk Power Scoop to create a one-day event that drew crowds to the future park, as well as created a lot of publicity.
The Earth Summit is intended to get environmental rescue efforts into high gear. Most of its accomplishments are on a governmental level. There's lots of work to be done on a one-by-one basis, as Action News reporter Lucy Yang found out today.
200 volunteers armed with gloves, rakes, and shovels gave up their beautiful Saturday morning today to help make Philadelphia a more beautiful city. Their mission to clean this strip of the park from the Art Museum to 25th and Spruce.
All of us have to be conscious. All of us have to pitch in. While we're having the big global policy decisions, I think we've got to roll up our sleeves and do our own little bit for the environment.
I am a true believer in the fact that all of us have to do something, and that has a collective effort.
Obviously, not everyone can attend an Earth Summit and sign global policies, but there are things the average citizen can do, like help clean up his own city or pressure companies to use more recycling. Experts say when it comes to protecting the Earth, every effort counts. Lucy Yang, Channel 6 Action News in Schuykill River Park.
That's what we need to do, get Philadelphia back on track, show people that, you can't keep a good Philadelphian down.
Earlier, the private sector contributed money to help cleanup groups such as Philipride.
This is the kind of private and public partnership the city is calling on.
at a time when the city says it cannot fully maintain public ground.
At least for the next few years, we're simply not going to have money to do all the things that you'd like us to do, that I'd like us to do, anybody would like us to do. But this is a tremendous first step for the citizens to be there and show us they want this park, but they're willing to work for it, and it's great.
For a number of years, we sponsored Schuykill River festivals, which included a 5K run, boat tours, canoe rides, and music. The boat tours went from the waterworks down to Bartram's Garden and gave many people a first-time view of the river that had for so long been hidden. In addition, we got an outfitter to provide a temporary dock with canoes and sculls to rent. One year, we were even able to shut down the Walnut Street Bridge for the day and have the festival on the bridge itself. The annual gala benefit, Revel on the River, drew in a different community and interest from numerous corporate sponsors. Held each year in a different place, including the waterworks and a riverside apartment building then under construction, the event offered dinner, dancing, and fireworks to cap off the evening. SRDC also developed a community rowing program modeled after a similar program in Hartford, Connecticut. We offered separate programs tailored to the needs of underserved school children, adults learning rowing for the first time, and to corporations wanting a team-building event. The ultimate goal was to engage public interest in getting a boathouse on the tidal Schuykill. At our annual conference, Spotlight on the Schuykill, hundreds of government officials, civic leaders, and community representatives met to learn from presenters from around the country what other cities were doing with their waterfronts. We had the chance to hear inspiring stories from many cities, including New York and its Hudson River Park, Hartford and the extraordinary work of riverfront recapture, Milwaukee and the effort led by Mayor John Norquist to develop their riverfront in 5 years, Portland, Oregon and its magnificent McCall Park, and the beautifully exquisite riverfront park in Providence, Rhode Island. Each year we began the conference with a river tour, which introduced out-of-town guests to local people and more importantly to the river. Often Mayor Rendell would join in to express his support. We had an ongoing PR effort to get articles and editorials in the Enquirer and other local newspapers. In addition to all the press, we received a number of awards from local and national organizations. In 1994, Primetime broadcast a segment on the river park. It mixed in a lot of interviews with local officials, which enhanced our credibility.
The history of our Delaware Valley has a river running through it. A river that was used, abused, and then all but forgotten until its recent rediscovery as a wellspring for a Philadelphia renaissance.
If we're going to be able to attract new residents back to the city, we're going to have to take advantage of a frontier like this.
I don't know of any other project which has received more support.
If we do this right, it can be great for all sorts of recreation.
I can see it all.
Times changed, and the lower Schuykill River grew into a graveyard of the Industrial Revolution. But slowly, the tide shifted in favor of the Schuykill River Park that had been in the planning stages for most of this century, until architect and developer John Randolph decided to make the plan a reality by forming the Schuykill River Development Council.
It was formed 2 years ago for the purposes of developing a river park between the Art Museum and Spruce Street.
The total project will cost $14 million, of which $4 million has already been committed from federal and city funds.
This is a very interesting and complex project. First, the city had to acquire parts of the land. We're dealing with the railroad. We're dealing with industrial developers. We're dealing with the federal government.
But most of all, they are dealing with the growing need of city folks to reconnect with their urban roots. This river.
Well, it's about time.
In 1997, as a result of all these efforts, construction began on the bulkheading. The park was finally on its way. To mark the occasion, we created a special celebration marking the 50th anniversary of Ed Bacon's plan, the 30th anniversary of the River Park Master Plan, and the 5th anniversary of the Schuykill River Development Council. Our efforts to boost the image of the Schuykill in the public imagination resulted in an unanticipated outcome. The Center City bridges were relit for the city's Millennium celebration. By our 10th anniversary, SRDC had raised the funding for the implementation of the original plan for an esplanade from the Waterworks to Locust Street. In addition, we created a master plan for the entire tidal river from the dam to the Delaware and developed a vast public-private partnership composed of government agencies as well as numerous corporate and institutional partners. As the transformation of the Schuykill gained momentum, we realized that the organization needed to transform itself as well, from a community-based to a stakeholder-based organization. Thus began the transformation of the organization from the Schuykill River Development Council to the Schuykill River Development Corporation. Looking back, I am in awe of the change that has happened. It fills me with enormous gratitude for all those who have helped us along the way, and for those who continue to make positive change happen. Through the contributions of countless individuals and organizations, the Schuykill River has been transformed from a dream revived to a river revived. Here is the river in 2020. The projects finished or underway by the Schuykill River Development Corporation that will complete the river trail from Locust Street to Bartram's Garden.